I have never known struggle like Richard's son. Born in 1935 in Nanjing, China, he faced more in his childhood than many of us do in our lives. As the Second Sino-Japanese War begins, Richard sees Japanese bombers flying overhead as he walks to and from school. The whirring of the engines and the flood of fear that washes over him is unprecedented. Due to the constant danger, his family flees to central China and remains there for 2 years, where Richard is forced to learn a second language, Cantonese. Although Japan initially held the upper hand, China was able to fight victoriously due to strategic tactics such as magnetic warfare and prolonging the war. When the war came to a close, Richard and his family were able to move back home. He looks forward to resuming his day-to-day life, and he will, but only for a short period of time. Richard's father works for the government, also known as the Nationalist Party, or the KMT. With the rise of the Communist Party also comes conflict. Civil war breaks out again in China, but this time the Communists, or CCP, win. They had gained the support of the people during the Second Sino-Japanese War when they fought off the Japanese rather than following Confucian tactics and doing nothing as the KMT did. Before he knows it, Richard leaves his home again, but this time permanently into a completely new country. His family follows the Nationalist Party to Taipei, Taiwan, where Richard spends the rest of his childhood. In the middle of the night, Richard and his family make the voyage by boat to Taiwan. They possess only what was on their backs, and travel with thousands of others attempting to escape the hands of communism. At the young age of 13, Richard had already experienced more violence and upheaval than some will experience in a lifetime. Despite all of this, Richard speaks with pride and appreciation. He remembers his family and childhood fondly, despite the constant moving and violence. He remembers the loving face of his mother, rather than the struggle of learning a new language and having no consistency in his life. While telling me his story, Richard always found a way to focus on the positive, and he never dwelled on the bad times. At the age of 23, Richard's son makes the move all alone to the United States of America. He had graduated at the Taipei Institute of Technology, but yearns for higher education. He wanted more than what Taiwan could provide for him. Following his parents' advice, he moves to a country across the globe and immerses himself in a language and culture he knows nothing of. He remembers arriving in America many weeks late for the first semester when studying his metallurgical engineering bachelor's degree at the University of Wisconsin. Knowing very little English, Richard is afraid to go to his classes. However, strangers from his lectures help him translate and take notes. When I ask him about the difficulties he faced when he first attended school, he recalls the people who helped him and how grateful he was for them, rather than remembering the disadvantages he had to face. Even after he married and had children, Richard still finds himself challenged by the small suburban in Indiana the sons call home. Being one of the only Asian families in Indiana, Richard constantly feels the language barrier between himself and his community. Not only that, but a cultural barrier persists as well. The food, holidays, and even television channels are unfamiliar to him. He feels like an outsider within his own community. But once again, Richard chooses to talk about how the obstacles he faced in Indiana make him appreciate the luxuries of California. He could have easily focused on the daily struggles and discrimination he faced, but chooses to look on the bright side again. In 1979, Richard and his family make the big move across the United States to Anaheim in sunny Southern California. He recalls how transformed his life was and the day-to-day liberties he appreciates that we all normally take for granted. He described California as his second home after China. California became somewhat of a safe haven for Richard, where he makes Chinese friends, watches Chinese television, celebrates Chinese New Year, and most importantly, eats as much Chinese food as any man could ever want. Once again, Richard did not let a negative experience define his life. His troubles in Indiana were overshadowed by everything he loved in California, allowing him to see his experience in America as beautiful. My grandfather reminds me of how important it is to see the positive in everything I do. Even though he endured many struggles, my grandfather remained grateful for every good thing that happened to him, even more so when it came with the bad. I think positivity is what helped Richard achieve the American dream. He moved to the United States, studied hard, found a job, and lives a happy and busy life. Despite the many obstacles, his positive outlook and perseverance kept him going and helped him achieve what so many people strive for. Richard can only say he achieved the American dream because he chooses every day to focus on everything positive that happened to him in America, rather than all of the negatives. I am both proud of and inspired by my grandfather for maintaining such an optimistic outlook on life, even when so many things seem terrible or wrong.